claim to have a daughter with the defendant, Mr. Davis, also fathered your 1-month-old son, Adonis. You learn you were not the only man climbing through hers. 1,000% certain that you are not Adonis's father and encourage Miss Perry to go find who is. Why do you feel Mr. Davis is denying your son?
Every other woman he can find and just too busy to take care of his responsibilities.
It's not correct.
Why are you denying it?
It's never about the kid. It's always about, oh, you want to be with me.
That's a lie. Between me and you, it's about our kids. That's all I ever wanted for you. If you don't have no money, then spend time. It's like, yes, I did care for him. I did. It's there for him. He cannot say that. I don't know what type of vendetta he got against me.
You say he just doesn't have time because he's running around with his friends.
Yes, he got a girlfriend. He got a baby mama. He got this one. He got that one. They both claiming him. So which one you? I'm not finna be sitting in this little love triangle.
So I've never been there for the baby.
What happens when a simple question, who's the father, turns into a storm of betrayal, regret, and redemption? When truth steps into the courtroom, it doesn't whisper. It transforms lives. Because sometimes, the test that was supposed to bring peace becomes the one DNA test people regret taking. In the tangled world of love, law, and loyalty, few truths cut as deep as the results of a DNA test. Every courtroom, every family dispute, every tear that falls on that wooden bench reveals something universal about the human condition, our endless struggle between truth and trust. This story unfolds inside the emotional landscape where people confront their deepest fears: infidelity, abandonment, and the haunting question of legitimacy. Each episode, like a living testimony, echoes themes explored on shows like the Truth Changes Everything podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. Platforms where human emotion meets moral judgment, where accountability is not just a word but a wound that demands healing. At its core, this narrative isn't just about paternity, it's about identity. Because when the test says you are not the father, it's not only a scientific result, it's a moral earthquake. It shakes the very foundation of family, love, and justice. The courtroom becomes a mirror of the human soul. Every raised voice, every trembling confession, and every defense is part of something much larger than the individuals themselves. It's about the relationship between law and justice, a concept that has fascinated philosophers and legal scholars since the dawn of jurisprudence. Yet here, that abstract idea comes alive. Justice isn't blind, it's deeply emotional. It's about mothers who fight to be believed, fathers who crave certainty, and children who silently inherit the consequences of adult chaos. The concept of justice in jurisprudence finds its truest expression not in grand speeches, but in quiet tears and trembling hands holding DNA envelopes. The court in these stories is not just a legal arena, it's a stage where evidence becomes emotion, and every confession feels like a verdict. As seen in the evidence stage in divorce case proceedings, the truth is rarely simple. Facts exist, but so do feelings. And in that delicate intersection, lives change forever. Each episode brings a deeper exploration of what it means to be human, to love, to betray, to hope again. It's a kind of moral laboratory where human choices are dissected and displayed. The DNA test becomes more than just a piece of evidence. It becomes a spiritual mirror reflecting who we really are when truth strips away our illusions. And yet, as harsh as it sounds, truth also heals. Through the chaos of accusations, infidelity, and doubt, there's something sacred about the courage to seek clarity. Just as Celebrate Recovery testimonies reveal how truth can restore the broken, these courtroom moments show how even in despair, there is redemption waiting in the light of honesty. One can't help but notice how stories like these intersect with the teachings of the Divorce Course podcast, where each broken relationship carries lessons about human imperfection, forgiveness, and personal growth. The tears are real, but so are the transformations. Some people leave the courtroom shattered, others renewed, but all leave changed. The painful reality is that many DNA test cheating stories don't just expose infidelity. They uncover years of silence, emotional neglect, or denial. A single test can dismantle an entire narrative. A relationship, a marriage, even a self-identity. But paradoxically, that same truth can also free people from the illusions that were suffocating them. Because truth doesn't destroy, it purifies. That's what makes these courtroom moments timeless. They echo something greater than gossip or scandal. They remind us that every relationship is a contract of trust. And when trust is broken, the law steps in to rewrite the terms. Yet the law itself has limits. Legal doctrines like the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act show that sometimes what is not said or not produced in evidence can speak volumes. Silence becomes testimony. Absence becomes presence. And the burden of proof becomes a moral weight few can bear. Inside these hearings, you can sense the weight of human contradiction. Love turns to bitterness, devotion turns to denial, and yet, even as the truth slices through layers of deception, there's a strange beauty in it. The raw honesty that forces people to face who they really are. In the modern legal and moral landscape, such stories act as living examples for discussions on the concept of justice in jurisprudence. They raise eternal questions. Can law ever truly deliver emotional justice? Can evidence ever fully heal a broken heart? Can a verdict bring peace to a soul? The answers aren't found in statutes or precedents, but in human faces. Those who stand trembling before the bench, seeking not punishment, but understanding. In that way, paternity court often feels less like a show and more like a mirror of society itself. It exposes how fragile truth can be in relationships that were built on partial honesty. It forces both men and women to confront the question, what do you do when love demands evidence? Many viewers might tune in expecting drama, but what they find instead is revelation, a subtle lesson in the ethics of truth-telling, the cost of secrecy, and the quiet redemption that follows exposure. Each DNA test result, each judgment, becomes a modern parable, and when the judge says, "You are not the father," it's never just about biology. It's about betrayal, forgiveness, and the complicated way justice weaves through human lives. These are modern morality tales, stories where legal procedure collides with raw human emotion. What gives these stories power is how they touch on universal themes echoed in adoption stories, full episodes, and Supreme Court child support rulings. Questions about responsibility, belonging, and moral duty. Whether it's a parent choosing to raise a child not biologically theirs, or a court enforcing financial responsibility, the thread is the same. Truth may hurt, but love still demands action. The emotional resonance of these cases also echoes real-life legal challenges seen in high-profile custody battles and paternity disputes. Just as discussed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, justice is not always about winning or losing. It's about finding closure and moral balance. Sometimes that means facing a truth you never wanted to know. Sometimes it means learning to forgive even when you can't forget. This is where philosophy meets reality. The relationship between law and justice has always been debated. Does the law serve justice, or does justice transcend the law? Inside these courtrooms, we see the answer unfold in real time. Because here, justice is not theoretical, it's lived. And when a parent says, "I just want the truth," they're not invoking a legal right. They're expressing something sacred, something deeply human, the desire for peace in a world built on uncertainty. In this space, where DNA results meet tears, the audience witnesses more than verdicts. They witness transformation. Each participant, whether plaintiff or defendant, walks out not just with an answer, but with a story rewritten by truth. Some learn humility, others discover strength, and many realize that the pain of revelation is still better than the poison of doubt. Because truth, no matter how painful, remains the ultimate form of justice. And perhaps that's why so many people, after watching or even experiencing these cases, reflect deeply, sometimes even on platforms like the Truth Changes Everything podcast. They recognize that the court isn't merely about legal procedure. It's a symbolic space where truth demands courage, and where justice finds its most human face. This courage The ability to face the results, to accept responsibility, to let go of lies, is the silent victory within every heartbreak. It's what makes stories like these not just courtroom drama, but living testimonies of grace and consequence. They remind us that the law can prove biology, but only love can define family. And somewhere between those two truths, between DNA and devotion, between justice and mercy, lies the essence of what it means to be human. When the courtroom falls silent and the envelope is finally opened, time seems to stop. The camera may focus on the trembling hands, the judge's calm but heavy tone, or the faces waiting for truth. But behind that moment lies something bigger than television. It's the sound of the human heart confronting evidence. And that confrontation is the heartbeat of this story. For generations, truth has been treated as an abstract ideal, something philosophers define, lawyers argue, and the faithful pray for. But in these paternity battles, truth is not an idea. It's a living force. It breaks homes, heals others, and changes the course of countless lives. You can feel that same pulse in conversations from the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where the host often reminds listeners that truth doesn't just expose lies, it exposes us. That is exactly what happens here. The truth doesn't only reveal who the father is, it reveals what kind of people they are when the veil of doubt is lifted. For some, it brings redemption. For others, ruin. But for all, it brings clarity, the kind of painful honesty that reshapes the soul. And that's why so many DNA test people regret taking are not regretted because of the science, but because of the aftermath. They regret the way truth dismantles illusions they were not ready to lose. They regret knowing what they once could deny. In that sense, the results become both a mirror and a punishment, a symbol of the reality they tried to avoid. Yet justice demands truth, and truth demands courage. That delicate balance, the one between seeking evidence and protecting hearts, is what defines the relationship between law and justice. It's not about punishment or revenge, but restoration. Justice tries to make people whole again, even when that means tearing apart what they thought was whole. The emotional layers of these stories often mirror the evidence stage in divorce, case proceedings, where lawyers fight to prove what love has already destroyed. The photographs, the text messages, the late-night confessions, they all become exhibits in the fragile theater of human weakness. The courtroom becomes a confessional, the witnesses become storytellers, and every cross-examination becomes a moment of reckoning. But the beauty of justice is that it does not belong only to the courts. It belongs to every person brave enough to face their truth. That's why so many people find comfort in platforms like Celebrate Recovery Testimonies, where shame becomes testimony and regret becomes a kind of healing. Because truth, once faced, loses its power to destroy. It becomes the very thing that saves. Still, the road to that salvation is brutal. For every man who discovers he's not the father, there's a child left confused about who they are. For every woman accused of deceit, there's a backstory of loneliness, of bad choices born from fear. The tragedy is not in the result, it's in the silence that preceded it. The unspoken doubts, the late-night whispers, the quiet avoidance of difficult conversations. It's why shows like the Divorce Course podcast have grown into sanctuaries for those trying to understand the moral anatomy of relationships. They reveal that love and law are not enemies. They're co-authors of every human story. The law defines what love forgot to protect, and love reminds the law why it must care. And yet, not all outcomes lead to peace. The legal principle known as the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act teaches us that when one side refuses to provide evidence, the law can infer guilt or negligence. But in matters of the heart, what do we infer from silence? When a partner refuses to take a DNA test or to tell the whole truth, does that silence scream louder than words? Sometimes it does. In those moments, silence becomes its own evidence. It becomes the space where trust dies and speculation thrives. It's that silence that pushes people to take matters into their own hands, to order secret tests, to demand answers, to uncover the betrayal hiding in plain sight. Those actions lead to the kind of DNA test cheating stories that fill both courtrooms and podcasts. Raw, painful stories of ordinary people navigating extraordinary hurt. In one such story, a man discovered through a test that none of the 3 children he raised were biologically his. He said later that the results didn't just change his life, they destroyed his faith in love. And yet, he still paid for their education, still showed up to graduations, still called them his kids. Because love, once real, does not vanish with evidence. That man became a living definition of the concept of justice in jurisprudence. The idea that true justice is not about vengeance or proof, but about moral responsibility. He knew the law no longer required him to care for them, but his heart did, and so his love became its own verdict. These are the stories that resonate deeply in a society obsessed with proof. We want facts, but we crave meaning. We seek closure, but we fear what closure demands, the death of illusion. The truth feels like light, but sometimes it burns before it heals. As legal professionals often discuss on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, justice today isn't just about legal outcomes. It's about human outcomes. It's about the child who deserves identity, the father who deserves peace, the mother who deserves to be believed. And in that sense, each case becomes more than an episode. It becomes a meditation on morality. Sometimes, the truth brings families together. Other times, it tears them apart. But what matters most is that it forces people to live authentically, to stop pretending, to stop living behind the mask of uncertainty. In many ways, the courtroom acts as a stage for redemption. And every story within it mirrors real-life adoption stories, full episodes. Narratives of belonging, of finding family, not by blood, but by choice. Adoption and paternity both deal with the same core question. What makes someone a parent? The law may answer one way, but the heart often answers another. Even the Supreme Court child support rulings reflect this tension between biology and responsibility. They define fatherhood not just as genetic, but as moral. Because while DNA can prove paternity, only consistent love can prove parenthood. There's an unspoken poetry in how these themes connect: the law, the heart, and the truth. Each one seeks balance in a world built on imbalance. Each tries to give order to chaos. But perhaps the most profound lesson hidden in these stories is that justice is not sterile. It is emotional. It is human. The woman who cries on the stand, the man who shakes his head in disbelief, the judge who maintains composure while holding back empathy, all are part of the same drama that defines the essence of justice. They remind us that law is not just a system. It's a story we keep rewriting as we evolve. What makes these tales unforgettable is not their drama, but their honesty. They strip away the comforting lies people tell themselves about loyalty, family, and fate. They show us how truth, even when painful, is the only force strong enough to rebuild trust. That's why each case, no matter how personal or chaotic, becomes a microcosm of something universal. They echo in classrooms where law students study moral philosophy, in courtrooms where judges wrestle with conscience, and even in churches where people share their celebrate recovery testimonies. The human story of sin, repentance, and grace repeats itself everywhere truth is finally told. When the envelope opens and the verdict is spoken, you can feel the air change. For some, it's relief. For others, heartbreak. But for all, it's transformation. Because truth doesn't just solve the case. It rewrites the person. What happens next often defines their entire life. Some walk away, never to return. Others stay, determined to rebuild. The pain of betrayal turns into the strength of awareness. They may appear on the Divorce Course podcast, sharing how knowing the truth, however devastating, gave them a new beginning. And though their voices tremble, there's always a quiet courage in them. The courage of those who have faced truth and survived. The great paradox of these stories is that justice hurts the innocent as much as it punishes the guilty. Children lose their fathers, partners lose their illusions, and families lose their peace. But within that loss, something sacred happens. The rebirth of integrity. The realization that honesty, even when it costs everything, is the only foundation worth rebuilding upon. That's why we keep watching, listening, reflecting. Because in each episode, we see ourselves, the lies we've told, the truths we've hidden, the forgiveness we crave. We are all, in some way, standing in that courtroom, waiting for a verdict. And when truth finally arrives, it doesn't whisper, it roars. It dismantles denial. It demands change. It becomes the unseen judge in every relationship, the unspoken law in every heart. That's the enduring message. Truth is not the enemy of love. It is its last, most loyal defender. When all the words have been spoken and the results are out, something deeper begins. Silence. The kind of silence that carries both pain and peace. In that stillness, people begin to realize that truth doesn't end a story. It begins one. The courtroom may close for the day, but for those involved, a lifelong process of healing begins. Every DNA test, every case of betrayal, every confession shared under oath becomes a turning point, a crossroad between bitterness and forgiveness. It's the space where people learn that justice and mercy are not opposites. They are partners in the long journey toward peace. For those who regret the DNA test people regret taking, the regret often isn't about uncovering the truth. It's about losing the illusion that once made them feel safe. It's about realizing that sometimes ignorance was easier to live with than clarity. But growth never comes from comfort. It comes from confrontation. The truth strips away the comfort of lies so that life can begin again, raw and honest. That's the same message you hear on the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where stories of broken families, unexpected revelations, and redemptive endings remind us that truth, however painful, is sacred. These are not stories of destruction, they're stories of rebirth. Because once the truth is known, the healing can finally begin. And healing, like justice, takes time. The law can declare who the father is, who owns the property, or who owes support. But it cannot legislate forgiveness. It cannot command love to return. It cannot heal the invisible wounds. That's where human courage must take over. The kind of courage you hear in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people speak of facing their mistakes and still choosing grace. In that sense, each courtroom case becomes a mirror of the relationship between law and justice. The idea that justice begins where the law ends. The law can define duty, but only conscience can define redemption. The cases that unfold here are often heartbreaking. A mother crying over lost trust, a father looking at a child who may not be his. But beneath that pain lies something beautiful. The unyielding human need to seek what's right. The instinct to find truth, no matter the cost. That instinct is what separates despair from growth. It's what transforms tragedy into testimony. Sometimes, when the judge reads the DNA results, the entire courtroom gasps. Other times there's just silence, a silence heavier than any sound, because in that moment, the truth has done its work. It has shattered illusions, rewritten identities, and exposed hearts that were once hidden. It's easy to see these as mere stories, but they're not. They're living studies of morality and consequence. In every dispute lies an unspoken question that belongs in the realm of jurisprudence. What is justice? Is it merely a verdict, or is it the process of understanding? The concept of justice in jurisprudence teaches that justice is not an outcome, but a principle, an ongoing act of aligning human behavior with truth. And in these stories, we see that alignment happen in real time. We see people resist, deny, weep, then finally accept. That acceptance, that surrender to truth, is the quiet moment where justice truly arrives. It's the same energy that runs through the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where professionals discuss not just winning cases, but transforming lives through accountability and empathy. The law becomes less about punishment and more about purpose. Every verdict, every ruling becomes an opportunity to restore dignity, even to those who've lost everything. And restoration, real restoration, often begins in the hardest places. For example, when a parent learns through a DNA test that they are not biologically related to a child they've raised for years, the pain is unspeakable. But then comes the decision to walk away or to stay. Those who stay teach us the highest form of justice, love that transcends proof. That's why the most powerful parallels can be drawn with adoption stories' full episodes, where love defies biology and belonging is chosen, not inherited. Parenthood is not limited to DNA. It's defined by devotion. The law can confirm a link between cells, but only the heart confirms a bond between souls. And in cases involving Supreme Court child support decisions, we see how law evolves to reflect that truth. Support is not just a financial duty, it's a moral one. The highest courts have long recognized that a parent's responsibility extends beyond biology. It's a duty born of care, not merely conception. But amid all the legal theories and moral lessons, there's another kind of story happening. The internal one. The transformation of those who once lied, once doubted, once hid. Through truth, they are remade. It's why we watch, why we listen, why these stories resonate so deeply. Because they remind us that no matter how broken we are,